Bruce Feldman is with us. You read him at The Athletic. You follow him on Twitter at Bruce Feldman CFB. If you don't, you should be. He's with us on the JohnstonRVCenter.com hotline. What's up, Bruce? How are you?
I'm doing great, guys. Good to be on with you.
It's always fun talking football with you. You guys at The Athletic are talking about your top 25 coaches in college football. You've dropped Nick Saban down to number 5, Bruce. And no, he hasn't, of course. Nick Saban is still number 1. I mean, it's been that way for a while where it's pretty easy to start at the top of this list, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, it is the biggest no-brainer there is. And actually, I mean, I feel like I've said this for about 5 years. I feel like he's hands down the greatest coach college football's ever seen. I mean, what he's done there is, 7 national titles, 10 SEC championships. I mean, when you would think complacency and all those things, the assistant coaches come and go, and he just keeps winning. It's not. I mean, there's a gulf between Nick Saban and Dabo at number 2, and that's not a knock on Dabo.
Yeah, with that said, after Dabo won that second national championship and they pretty much ran Alabama off the field, people were saying, is Dabo the number 1 coach in college football? And since then, it continues to drop. What do you think it takes, Bruce, for somebody to take over number 2 from Dabo?
I think it would take, look, Kirby Smart's probably the one in the best position to do it. I think you got to win a couple of national titles, right? Now, look, what's different for Dabo, and I hope this doesn't sound like I'm demeaning, just downplaying what he's done, is he's in a pretty weak conference in the ACC. It's the Clemson right now, and now we're waiting for the next best team. Right now, the next best team might be NC State. It's that's the gap. But I remember, just towards your point, I feel like I might have been on with you guys or somebody. I feel like it might have been you guys the day of the Clemson LSU national title game, and the talk was, if Dabo wins this one, does he push past Nick Saban, right? Well, Dabo didn't win that one, and it's not like he's falling apart, but obviously Nick Saban is just keeps widening the gap. But to me, Kirby, now that he's won a national title, the way he's recruiting, I don't want to say the monkey's off his back, but there is something to, once you've won this, now let's see where they go. After that, I don't know. I mean, to me, it's like Ryan Day. He hasn't won a title. He's 34-4 and 23-1 the Big Ten. But you got to win championships if you're going to get there. Same deal with Brian Kelly and Lincoln Riley. So right now it's like Kirby. If you ask me 5 years from now, could Kirby be the number 2 coach in college football? Yes, it's very possible.
And you have Kirby number 3 on your list. You can get it at The Athletic, and Bruce's colleague Stuart Mandel does his top 25 list. It looks a little different than Bruce's there. All that for you.
He's got Saban 10, right?
Yeah, all that in our morning rounds of top
he does. Yeah.
of our top reads right there at nextroundlive.com. Now, Kirby moved a lot with his national championship, but just a quick pass through the entire list, not the biggest mover on the list. I think I would give that to Dave Clawson, who goes unranked in your list last year, all the way up to number 11. And this seems to be a growing consensus about just how good of a football coach Dave Clawson is, Bruce.
Yeah, I mean, look, I should have had him in there before now. A couple of things have happened. We had a bunch of guys who were on my list who either got fired or, Gary Patterson, whatever they did with him. It was like Ed Ogeron was on this list, Dan Mullen was on this list, obviously Patterson. And I think in Clawson's case, I knew he was a really good coach because, he'd done it at Fordham, Richmond, and Bowling Green, but obviously those are kind of off the radar places. To see what he's done at Wake Forest, they keep getting better and better. 11-3 last year. They were number 14 overall. It's at a small school. It is not an easy place. I think a lot of people had a ton of respect for Jim Grove, what he had done there. But from everything I've heard is, this program has a chance to be a top 20 program again, and it's not an easy place to win. So I think if Dave Clawson was at a bigger school, I think people would know his name. They would know what he looks like. Maybe they know more about that slow mesh offense that's kind of funky that really nobody else in college football runs. But they've had a lot of success. And the other thing is, he has groomed a bunch of guys who have really risen up in the coaching ranks. Remember, Mike Elko was his defensive coordinator. Clark Lee, who's obviously an SEC head coach, also worked there. There's been a lot of good coaches who've learned under Dave Clawson, and I just think that, he definitely deserves to be in that top 15.
Bruce Feldman is with us on the JohnstonRVCenter.com hotline. Go subscribe to The Athletic and see this full list. Top 25 coaches in college football. At Bruce Feldman CFB is where you find him on Twitter. Look, in this, you could do these a million different ways. You could do, if I had to hire a coach for 10 years, that might be different than Nick Saban, who may not give you 10 years, right? But no matter how you do it, did you think there would be a time where you would have Lane Kiffin in front of Kirk Ferentz? Because Ferentz has been highly regarded his whole career there at Iowa. Yeah, you've got Kiffin in front of him right now.
Yeah, so much of it was on the upswing of last year, what he was able to do. He's out, him being out here as the USC assistant, 20 years ago almost, and being around him a bunch. I knew he was really sharp offensive mind. I think what has been good to see is I think he has grown up in a lot of ways. Now, he's still Lane Kiffin, but he is, I think there are things where he has evolved and he has managed things better. Last year, they had a terrific year going 10-3. I think he obviously grew and learned a bunch of stuff as, working for Nick Saban. And then I think he did well in Conference USA at FAU. Now, Stu has Lane up a lot higher than I did. And my question to him was, I think he's trending in the right direction. At the same time, he's been a head coach 10 years and he's only had 2 top 25 seasons. And, he has been at some big schools. I get it. USC was during the sanctions, but they were still taken over from Pete Carroll, and it's just like, I think we need to see more consistency before he continues to move upward. He's definitely made that program interesting and relevant. I think kids want to play for him, play in that offense. And that is a big key. And, who knows? Lane Kiffin could be a top 10 coach, in the next 2 years if he keeps going in this direction.
Bruce, I think your top 6, I don't want to say it's easy, but I agree 100% with your top 6. Once we get to 7, though, Jimbo Fisher. I know somebody's got to be 7. And I get a lot of, I don't want to call it grief, but people might think it's kind of a running joke, my disdain for Jimbo Fisher. It's not even that. I think the guy's overrated. And outside of that national championship with a generational quarterback, why does Jimbo Fisher warrant number 7 on this list?
We call Lance sliced bread here on the show. He's sliced bread.
This is an interesting discussion because I feel like some people go, why is a guy who won a national title behind Lincoln Riley and Brian Kelly and Ryan Day, who's only been there a few years? And on the same time, I feel like I don't want to go all the way on where Lance is, but like if you base it, and Stu does more, I want to say Stu is more like a house cat, more the creature in the moment, whereas like I will look at more of a body of work. Yes, he did win a national title 9 years ago at FSU. I don't want to factor in and say, oh, he just had a recruiting class for the ages, because we got to see if those players really develop there and are as good as they were hyped to be, and B, if they actually stay there. So I don't want to go overboard on how much the recruiting merits are. He did have a terrific season in 2020. They were 9-1 and they finished number 4. If he didn't have that, and let's say it was another, even if it was a 9-4 year, because that's what A&M feels like, it's a lot of 8-4, 9, that kind of deal. I've been like, it's hard to put him in the top 10, but he did have that 1 year in his first 4 year. The counter to it, where I think Lance is probably coming from to some degree, is if you look at his last 5 years, including that year at FSU, which was his whole recruits and everything. So he's only had 2 seasons in the last 5 years where in conference they have had a better than 500 record. That's not great. Like that, I get it, that they are paying him a fortune. And it sounded like Scott Woodward was willing to pay him. My friend Brett McMurphy, I think, reported he was willing to pay him like $15 million a year. I mean, Nick Saban's not getting that money, and we know that Nick Saban is, where he sits compared to Jimbo. So I don't know if I'm arguing for Lance or with him. I don't know.
We find ourselves in that spot a lot on this show.
I will tell you, I appreciate you looking right past the "Don't Feed the Bear" sign, though, and just throwing him all these nuggets that he is writing down over here. He's going to hit us over the head with all summer. Yes.
Really, the thing is, after you get past 6, I mean, I got Kyle Whittingham at 8. Everybody knows he's a really good coach, and then you get to 9, and I have a guy that I'm constantly arguing for, and the biggest debates, like Stu seems to loathe James Franklin, and I bumped him down from 5 to 9 because they've had back-to-back dud years. But for me, and you didn't ask me this, but I still, just like with Jimbo, but also with James Franklin, like I can't like act like what he did at Vandy, taking that program, which has been god awful before and is pretty much god awful since he left, and he had him in the top 25 2 out of 3 years. Like I can't forget that. Just like I can't forget Jimbo actually did win a national title, because if he didn't win the national title at FSU, nobody's trying to pay him $10 million a year to coach your team.
Yeah, I was going to bring up James Franklin because you have three guys that went backwards in your ranking, in Matt Campbell, James Franklin, and Paul Chryst. Which one of those guys needs a good year this year the most? Is it Franklin?
Yeah, I think it is. It's not like they're going to fire him. They just paid him a fortune, and they're locked into him for a while. Now he just signed the number 6 class in the country, so that I guess bodes well. But I think you need to stem the tide. They've had a revolving door and the offensive coordinator spot ever since Joe Moorhead left to become the head coach at Mississippi State. And they've produced a bunch of players, but the wins the last 2 years just haven't been there, right? And that league has gotten a little thicker right now. If you look, obviously Ohio State is on the top of its game, but Mel Tucker has made Michigan State a bigger problem for the rest of the teams in that division. Harbaugh just led Michigan to its first Big Ten title in, I guess, 17 years. So then if you're sitting there at Penn State, you're like, it was us, and we felt like it was us and Ohio State, and now all of a sudden it's gotten a lot thicker in there.
All right, he is Bruce Feldman. Go follow him on Twitter at Bruce Feldman CFB. He's a New York Times best-selling author. Any of his football books are really, really good. And subscribe to The Athletic so you can read where your favorite coach is and what he says about your favorite coach. Stuart Mandel doing it as well at The Athletic. Bruce, it is always a pleasure. We thank you so much for the time.
My pleasure, guys. Always good talking football with you.
You too, man. Take care. Bruce Feldman with us on the JohnstonRVCenter.com hotline.